And even being confronted with something that is like weird or uncomfortable, character growth. Like having to ask the question, why is this person doing this weird thing? It's a good exercise in empathy, to be perfectly honest. Like, why is this person doing this thing? Why does that make me uncomfortable? What is it about my perception that has shaped this experience for me? I feel like those are really essential questions for us to be constantly asking ourselves, especially in an age where there's a lot of discord, there's a lot of dissent, there's a lot of disagreement, and the better we understand ourselves, the better we're able to engage with humans who are different than us.
Episode 232. My conversation with Megan Moe, beitiks, assistant professor in theatre at Concordia University in Montreal. Megan Moe is an artist and designer working with associations and disassociations of culture, nature, and structure. It's our mutual friend Ian Garrett who thought we might get along, and we did. Our conversation in Megan Moe's kitchen focused on Angles of Consequence, a season of site-specific performances with Canadian performers who created works with reflected sunlight in key sites of climate advocacy and destruction in Quebec. It was a very enlightening conversation. Angles of Consequence.
So, one of the things that I feel like we don't talk about enough in the arts world is that there's a fair amount of research at this point that have established the cultural, psychological, and almost like biological necessity of making art as a way to process feelings, perspectives, thoughts. One of the things that, like, art gets this kind of reputation of being fun or inventive, and that, like, those are its primary things, that it will distract us or it will create a new world. But I feel like the importance of art in processing doesn't always get the fair amount of play that it gets. And a lot of folks who think that maybe they can't make art if they're not an official capital A artist miss the fact that the making the art is not always about the product. Sometimes it's just about the process. That being said, like, art has also been proven to be really effective at spreading information, raising awareness, connecting communities. It is also really consistently innovative. It introduces new ideas into the world and introduces new paradigms of thought, ways of approaching things. So I would say, like, when folks, when we come into moments of crisis or collapse, I think most people's first thought is, prepping or politics or that sort of thing, and that's valid. But I think that the thing that we can forget really easily is that we also need moments of digestion. We need moments to absorb and understand what we've experienced and what we've learned, and then that moment of digestion can lead to ways of problem solving, like recalibrating ourselves to meet a new challenge, building connections and strengthening communities to work together in the face of difficult times. So,
well, we've met twice now.
Mm-hmm.
I heard about you from Ian Garrett, who's, I think, a colleague of yours.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because you write the way I think. Or I think the way you write, I'm not sure. So Megan Moe, I wanted to know, people can read your bio and the episode notes, but where are you at now? I know you're a teacher, but you're also a creator. Mm-hmm. And what are you working on that, is super inspiring?
Well, I don't know about super inspiring, but during the pandemic, I started working a lot with reflected sunlight because it was a material available. I was living in Florida and trapped indoors and watching the sun kind of pass over the floor. And so I started creating installations with reflected sunlight and mirrors. And I went on to create a performance with reflected sunlight with local performances in Las Vegas and with the Rogers Art Loft. And so that has kind of evolved to my current project, which is called Angles of Consequence. And what it is a series of site-specific performances that I'm producing by other artists with reflected sunlight at locations that are crucial to climate change. So me and some research assistants were funded by a SSHRC Insight Development Grant. We did some research on what are some locations in Montreal and Quebec that are relevant to this question of climate change. And to answer that question, we really had to look at what are organizations that are having the most outsized impact on the climate, both positive and negative. The negative is really easy to prove. It's the fossil fuel companies. There's tons of data out there on it. Everything's very interwoven. If you're making fossil fuels, you are having a very negative impact on the planet. The positive is a lot harder to discern, mostly because there's a million ways to lessen climate impact. But there's also a million different types of greenwashing happening with companies that are trying to present themselves as more ecologically friendly, or they're focused on one aspect of sustainability, but they're not taking into account a whole bunch of others. But one of the things that we found is that something again that has been proven to be consistently effective is actually Indigenous protests and resistance against fossil fuel system expansion. And there was a report called, I believe it's called Indigenous Against Carbon. It's by the Indigenous Environmental Network and Oil International, I believe. And it breaks down the millions of gallons of oil that have been kept out of the atmosphere by Indigenous resistance to fossil fuel system expansion, specifically pipelines. So we found that there was a pipeline that was planned through Montreal. It was called the East Energy Pipeline.
It might be coming back.
I know, if depending on legislation. But it was initially shut down from local Indigenous resistance. And so one of the sites of the performances that we chose was along that path of the canceled East Energy Pipeline. And then another location is a refinery in Montreal Est, which I don't know that everyone realizes that even though in Quebec we have some of the cleanest power in Canada, most of it is hydroelectric, which has its own fraught history with Indigenous communities. But we have a number of refineries in Montreal Est that are processing that fossil fuel. And one of the reasons I think that maybe is not always on the forefront of people's consciousness is that there was a bill a few years ago that prohibited the expansion of further fossil fuel development in Quebec. And that is still valid to this day. And so we have another group of artists who have taken on that bill itself as a prompt and have selected their own site in considering kind of all of the questions and issues that come up in considering the bill. So we have we have a solo artist, we have a duo, and we have a group of three and they're each working with a specific site, and our research assistants are acting as assistants and stage managers and documenters to them. We're going to do an official season launch on May 1st with Force Space at Concordia, so there'll be a live stream discussion and panel and broadcast through them. And then the performances will take place in June of this year. And one of the things that I like to warn people about that feels like an awkward logistical element, but is actually core to the work, is that each of the performances have an initial scheduled date and they have 2 backup dates in case the sun decides not to show. And the thing that I like to remind people is like, and this has been true of my own work as well, is like the sun is not going to show up on your time, right? It doesn't care whether you're giving a performance, is busy, right? So I've encouraged the artists to think both about how they work on a clear sunny day and also like how the work plays out when they might not have direct sunlight. That being said, if there's rain or something, we have these backup dates. But I think it's also, I mean, talk about the role of the artist. Increasingly, I feel like this is an important mindset to have or a stance to take. We think about what it means to be a great artist in terms of mastery, control, and genius. We think if someone is a great artist, they have total control over their material or their craft. And if hopefully they're really valid if they're a genius, and that means that no one's allowed to question them and everyone should scramble to make whatever weird request they have work. Well, when you're trying to collaborate with the sun, again, it doesn't give a crap what your resume is or like what you've done so far. It's going to show up on its own terms. It's got its own community with clouds and, microclimates that it's navigating. And I feel like it's really humbling to be like, I'm going to make this whole work that's centered around the sun, and the sun might decide to not show up that day. Or it might behave differently than I expect. There might be clouds. There might be a wind that shows up and introduces a new element. And I'm really interested in considering that dialogue, both of like, how do I do what I do, effectively to the best of my ability, but how do I let go of some of this perception of control that I have and embrace how the work unfolds when I've surrendered part of it to an ecological entity. But all of that is, it's grounding us in where we are physically on the planet. I talk a lot about like positionality in both literal and cultural senses, that our view of the world is determined in part by our literal location on the globe, but also by these other layers of gender, race, class, etc., that shape how we experience the world. And so that's part of what I'm really excited about, is all of these artists are taking very different approaches. They come from different trainings. They come from different positionalities. And so my hope is that produces a very broad vocabulary of how to engage with sunlight in performance. And then part of the project is that we're producing an open access guide for performing with sunlight. And I'm hoping to distribute that and encourage other folks around the world to make their own sunlight reflective performances.
Mm-hmm. Now we're almost out of time, which is unusual. Not unusual, but unfortunate. We're not going to talk about scenography and all those other things that we might have, but maybe at another time. I end with action points. Now you've just given me a really good one, which is this whole artwork. But what other things? Now you're an educator around scenography and sustainability. What kind of advice do you have for artists and our listeners?
So there's you mentioned Ian Garrett. The Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts has a really fantastic platform called Canada Green Tools that is about calculating the carbon footprint of different sizes of events or performances. And I feel like that sort of thing is useful. It's kind of a drag because it's very bureaucratic. It's about like, math and numbers and all of that, unless you love those things, which go for it. But there's an older talk that Ian gave a while ago that I really like, that is about considering the fact that gathering people in one place is inherently sustainable, in that on a carbon level, everyone's in theory turning off all of their lights at home and coming to the one place to gather together. But I would also say that, circling back to kind of my first answer, that's also part of what helps us in these difficult times of crisis and climate change and political upheaval, is that we are invited to be human in space with one another. And that's also one reason why I think live performance is so important, especially in the age of AI, is that we are met face to face with kind of the miracle of our own existence. Like, humans are incredible. They do crazy, incredible stuff all the time. And being able to witness that up close and consider what that human is doing in relationship to your own humanness, I feel like it makes us all clearer, more grounded, and better. And even being confronted with something that is like weird or uncomfortable, character growth. Like, you have to having to ask the question, why is this person doing this weird thing? It's a good exercise in empathy, to be perfectly honest.